15 years I've kept this gate locked. Give me one reason I should open it for you." The rifle didn't waver in Nathaniel Brooks' hands, even as the woman crawled through the mud toward his porch. She couldn't stand. She couldn't lift her head. But she raised one shaking hand, clutching a soaked scrap of paper that would tear open everything he'd spent a decade and a half burying. "Because," she whispered through cracked lips, "I already belong to a man, just not you. If you're watching, subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels." The rifle came up before Nathaniel Brooks was even fully awake. He'd heard the pounding on the door, the way a man hears his own name called in a graveyard, slow disbelieving certain he'd imagined it. Nobody knocked on that door. Nobody had knocked on that door in longer than he cared to count. The ranch hands slept out in the bunkhouse and knew better than to bother him after dark. The nearest neighbor was a 2-hour ride in good weather, and this was not good weather. This was the kind of storm that peeled shingles off barns and drowned cattle in the low washes. So when the pounding came again weaker, this time more of a scrape than a knock, Nathaniel took the rifle down off the wall. "Whoever you are," he called through the door, "you've got the wrong house." No answer. Only the wind, and under the wind, a sound he didn't want to name. A small sound. A human sound. He unbolted the door and swung it inward, and the storm came in with it. And there, on the boards of his own porch, was a woman on her hands and knees, soaked black to the skin, her hair plastered across a face he could barely see. "Get up," he said. She didn't get up. "I said get up. This is private land." She lifted her head then, and he saw her eyes, and something in his chest went cold and still in a way it had not gone in 15 years. "Please," she said. That was the whole of it. One word. Please. And Nathaniel Brooks, who had turned away drifters and drummers and preachers and a woman once with a baby in her arms because he'd been too far gone in his own grief to care. Nathaniel stood there with the rain sheeting off the porch roof and could not for the life of him make his mouth say the word no. He carried her inside. He hadn't decided to. His body decided for him, and he was halfway to the fire before his mind caught up and started arguing. She weighed almost nothing. That was the first thing that struck him, that a grown woman could weigh so little, like a bundle of wet kindling, like something that had already given most of itself away to the road. Her hands, when they brushed his neck, were ice. Her lips had gone the gray-blue of a corpse. He set her down in the chair nearest the hearth, the one that had sat empty so long he'd half forgotten it was a chair, and not just part of the room. "Don't die on my floor," he told her. "I've got no patience for burying strangers." Her eyes found his. There was fear in them, but under the fear was something harder. Something that had learned not to expect kindness and had decided to survive anyway. "I'm not going to die," she said. Her voice was a rasp. "I've had plenty of better chances than tonight." That almost pulled a laugh out of him. Almost. He hadn't laughed in so long the muscles didn't remember how. He threw 2 more logs on the fire and dragged the flames up hot. And he pulled the good wool blanket off his own bed, the one he never used folded on the side of the mattress. No one slept on, and he wrapped her in it. His hands shook doing it. He told himself it was the cold. "You got a name?" he asked. She swallowed. It clearly cost her something. "Evelyn," she said. "Evelyn Harper." "Well, Evelyn Harper, you picked the worst house in the whole territory to nearly die in front of." "I didn't pick it," she whispered. "The horse did. And then the horse died." He made her drink. That was the second fight. She kept trying to talk, to explain herself, and he kept pushing the tin cup of hot water and whiskey at her mouth, and finally he lost his temper. "Woman, you can tell me your whole life story once your blood's thawed out. Right now you drink or I pour it down you." She drank. He watched the color come back into her face by degrees, the way you watch light come up over the mountains, so slow you can't catch the moment it changes, but you know it's changing. Her hands stopped shaking. Her breath came slower, deeper. and that was when he saw the paper. She'd been holding it the whole time. Even unconscious, carried across his floor, her fist had stayed closed around it, and now in the firelight, he could see it was paper thick. Paper folded many times, soaked and swollen, and coming apart at the creases. "What's that?" he said. Her fingers tightened. "Give it here. I'm not going to eat it." For a long moment she didn't move. Then slowly, like she was handing over a piece of her own body, she opened her fist and held it out. Nathaniel took it to the lamp. He unfolded it carefully, one crease at a time, because the paper wanted to tear, and he found to his own surprise that he did not want it to tear. The ink had run. Whole words had washed away into gray clouds. But enough remained. Agreement of marriage between the undersigned, Miss Evelyn Harper of St. Louis, and Mr. The groom's name was gone, bled away to nothing by the rain. To be received at the township of G. That was gone too. Nathaniel stood there holding another man's marriage in his hands. "You're a bride," he said. "I'm a bride," she said, "for a man I've never met in a place I've never been, and I've lost everything that could tell me who or where, everything but that." He put the paper down on the table like it might catch fire. "Then you're on the wrong ranch," he said. "There's no groom here. There's nobody here but me, and I'm not in the market." He hadn't meant it to come out cruel. It came out cruel anyway. 15 years of talking mostly to horses will do that to a man's tongue. Evelyn didn't flinch. She looked at him steadily from inside the blanket, and she said, "I know I'm on the wrong ranch. I've known it since your horse. Since my horse, since the road ran out. I'm not asking you to marry me, Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks, I'm asking you for one night out of the rain so I don't freeze to death on the frontier before I ever reach the man I was promised to. In the morning I'll go. You'll never have to think about me again. One night." The words landed strange in the quiet house. He thought about all the reasons to say no. He was good at reasons to say no. He'd built a life out of them, brick by brick, a fortress of them, and it had kept everything out for 15 years. Every friend, every neighbor, every well-meaning widow who'd shown up with a pie and a hopeful look. He'd sent them all away, and it had worked. Nothing had touched him. Nothing had cost him anything, because he had nothing left worth costing. One night, he said, and something in the fortress shifted, just one brick, but he felt it go. She fell asleep in the chair before she could thank him, which was fine, because he wouldn't have known what to do with the thanks. He sat across the room and watched her sleep the rifle across his knees out of habit, and he tried to make sense of the wrongness he felt. It wasn't fear. He didn't fear her half-drowned and starved. She couldn't have wrestled a barn cat. It wasn't suspicion, though. A smarter man would have been suspicious. It was something worse. It was recognition. He knew that stillness. The stillness of a person who has run so long and so far that stopping feels more dangerous than moving. He'd worn that same stillness once, a long time ago, before he'd traded it for the deeper stillness of the dead. Around midnight, the fire settled, and she stirred, and she said a name. She didn't say it to him. She said it to whoever haunted her sleep. A man's name, sharp and afraid. No Silas, no. Nathaniel's hand tightened on the rifle. He didn't know a Silas, but he knew the shape of a name spoken like that. He'd heard grown men in war say enemy names in their sleep, in exactly that voice. Whoever Silas was, Evelyn Harper wasn't running toward a wedding. She was running away from something. Morning came gray and wrung out, the storm finally spent, and Nathaniel was already up and had coffee on when she woke. She came awake all at once, the way hunted things do, no yawn, no stretch, just her eyes snapping open and her whole body going rigid until she remembered where she was, and more importantly, where she wasn't. "You didn't have to sit up all night," she said. "Didn't say I did. You've got the same coffee in the pot from last evening, and you're wearing the same everything. You've sat up all night." She pushed the blanket off and tried to stand, and her legs betrayed her, and she caught the back of the chair. "I said I'd be gone by morning. I meant it. Sit down before you fall down." I keep my word. You'll keep it flat on your face if you don't sit." He crossed the room, and without asking, put a bowl in her hands. Cornmeal mush. Nothing fancy, but hot. "Eat. Then we'll talk about you keeping your word." She looked at the bowl. She looked at him. And then she did something that made his chest tighten again. She started to eat slowly, deliberately, spacing out the bites, and he realized with a jolt of shame that she was rationing it. She'd learned somewhere sometime that a full bowl of food was a lie the world told you before it took the bowl away. "There's more," he said roughly. "In the pot. Eat like you mean it." She looked up at him over the spoon. Her eyes were wet and she was furious about it. He could tell furious at herself for the tears. "Nobody's told me to eat like I mean it," she said, "in a very long time." Over the mush, she told him the shape of it. Not all of it, he could hear the edges she stepped carefully around, but the shape. There'd been 6 of them. 6 women on a covered wagon rolling west out of the last railhead. All of them mail-order brides, all of them signed and paid for and shipped like freight to men they'd never seen. 2 days outriders had come down out of the rocks. Not soldiers, not law. "Bandits," Nathaniel said. Evelyn's spoon paused. "That's the word everyone uses," she said. "It's the easy word. You've got a harder one." She didn't answer that. She went on. The men had come at dusk, spooked the team, tipped the wagon. In the dark, and the screaming, Evelyn had run. She'd just run, no plan, no direction, straight up into the rocks with her contract stuffed in her bodice, because it was the only thing that proved she was somebody's, and somebody's was safer than nobody's out here. She'd run all night. She'd lost the others. She'd lost the road. She'd found a stray horse 3 days later, half wild, and she'd walked it and rode it in turns across country she couldn't name until the storm caught them both, and the horse had gone down in a wash, and she'd walked the last miles on foot toward the only light she could see. "Which was mine," Nathaniel said. "Which was yours?" He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "The other 5 women. What happened to them?" Evelyn set the spoon down in the empty bowl. "I don't know," she said, "and I'd give a great deal not to have to imagine." He should have left it there. A smart man would have left it there. Feed her, dry her, put her on a horse toward town, let the law and the church and the other man sort out the rest. It was none of his affair. He'd made a religion out of things being none of his affair. Instead, he heard himself say, "This Silas." Evelyn went white. "You said the name in your sleep." Nathaniel went on watching her the way he'd watch a horse deciding whether to bolt. "Said it like the devil was in the room. So I'll ask you plain because I don't have the patience for anything else. Are those men after the wagon, or are they after you?" For a long moment she said nothing. The fire ticked. Outside, a rooster that had survived the storm decided the world still turned. Then Evelyn Harper looked him dead in the eye and told him the first piece of the truth. "They called my name," she whispered. "In the dark, when the wagon went over. I heard one of them shout it, not the women, not the bride, my name, Evelyn. Like they'd come all that way for me particular." Her hands had begun to shake again, and it wasn't the cold this time. "Mr. Brooks, I signed up to marry a stranger 400 miles from anyone I'd ever known because I thought 400 miles was far enough. It wasn't. It was never going to be far enough. And there it was. The thing under the thing. The reason a young woman had climbed onto a wagon of strangers and shipped herself into the wilderness like a parcel. She wasn't chasing a husband. She was outrunning one. Nathaniel stood up so fast the chair scraped. He walked to the window. He put his hands on the sill. He stood there a long while with his back to her, and Evelyn, who had learned to read the backs of men, braced herself for the part where he told her to get out, where he decided her trouble was too big and too near, and no dry night was worth it, and there was the door. She'd heard it before, from a preacher, from a marshal, from a woman she'd thought was her friend. "Your trouble's too big, Evelyn. You'll have to take it somewhere else." She started gathering the blanket. "I understand," she said. "You've been more than sit down. Kind, and I won't bring it to your door any further than I—" "Woman." He turned around, and his face had changed. Something had come up in it from a long way down like a body rising in a lake. I said, "Sit down." She sat. 15 years ago. Nathaniel Brooks said, "I turned somebody away from that door, Charlie." The words came out of him rusty and wrong, like a gate that hadn't been swung in so long it fought its own hinges. Evelyn didn't move. She understood without being told that this was a thing he had never once said out loud, and that if she so much as breathed wrong, it might sink back down and never surface again. "Her name was Clara," he said. "We were to be married. Everything was ready. This house I built the second room for her. I built the whole thing for her. And a week before the wedding there was a sickness in town. A fever went through fast, and I told her stay away. I told her, 'Clara, you keep to your own place till it burns out. I don't want you near it.' I was protecting her. That's what I told myself." He looked at his hands. She got word her sister was sick with it. Her married sister on the far side of the valley alone with 2 little ones. And Clara sent a rider, asked me to come with her to take her because the crossing was bad and the water was up and she was afraid to go alone. Evelyn's breath had stopped. "And I sent the rider back," Nathaniel said, "with word that she was to stay put, that I forbade it, that I'd handle it after the fever passed. I thought—" His voice cracked, and he let it because there was no one left to hide it from. "I thought I was keeping her safe. I thought as long as I kept everybody where I could see them, kept the doors shut, kept the world out, I'd never lose anything again." He was quiet a moment. She went alone. In the night. Didn't wait for me, didn't tell me. The crossing took her horse, and it took her, and they found her 3 days downriver. And the last thing I ever said to that woman was no, was stay put, was I forbid it. He finally looked up at Evelyn, and his eyes were dry, which was somehow worse than if they'd been wet. "So, don't you tell me you understand when I ask you to leave, because I've been asking people to leave for 15 years, and the one time it mattered, when a woman I loved came to a door in the dark needing help, the door was shut, and she died on the wrong side of it." The fire ticked. Neither of them spoke. Evelyn Harper had heard a great many men explain themselves. She had learned that most explanations were really excuses wearing Sunday clothes. But this was not that. This was a man cutting himself open on his own kitchen floor, because a stranger had without meaning to walked in and pressed on the exact place where the old wound had never closed. "Mr. Brooks," she said carefully, "I'm not Clara." "No," he said, "you're not." He drew a long breath. "But you came to a door in the dark, and I nearly did it again. I had the rifle up. I had the word no right here in my mouth." He tapped his own jaw. "And I don't know what stopped it. I truly don't. But I know I'm not going to spend another 15 years finding out what would have happened if I'd said it." He crossed the room and picked up her ruined contract off the table. "So here's how it's going to be," he said. "You're not leaving today. The passes'll be washed out from that storm. No getting through to any township not yours, not any. You'll stay till the water goes down, and I can find out where you're supposed to be, and whether it's safe to send you there. In the meantime, you don't touch a horse, and you don't sneak off in the night trying to keep me out of your trouble. You did enough sneaking off in the night for one lifetime, and look where it landed you. That's not—" Evelyn started. "That's not up for a vote," he said. "That's the deal. You're under my roof, you're under my protection, and I've had 15 years to get very good at keeping people out. Turns out the same skills work the other direction." Evelyn stared at him. And then, God help her, she felt her face doing something it hadn't done in longer than she could remember. It was crumpling. She was going to cry right there in front of this stranger with the terrible eyes and the terrible story, and she hated it and she couldn't stop it. "Why?" she managed. "Why would you do this for someone you don't know?" Nathaniel Brooks folded the contract back up along its ruined creases gently, the way you'd fold a flag. "Because," he said, "I already know what it costs to say no." That should have been the end of the argument. It wasn't. Because Evelyn Harper had one more piece of truth she hadn't spoken, and her whole broken life had taught her that a man who was kind before he knew everything would be cruel after. Better to say it now. Better to be thrown out honest than kept on a lie. Then you should know the rest, she said, before you decide. Nathaniel waited. Silas Croft, she said, isn't just some man I ran from. He owns the mill I worked in back east. He owns the row houses the mill girls live in. He owns the store where we buy our bread and the notes on half the families in that town. And what Silas Croft decides he owns, it doesn't matter if it's a loom or a lease or a girl. Her jaw set. He decided he was going to marry me. Not asked, decided. Announced it to the floor supervisor like he was buying a length of cloth. And when I said no, when I stood in his office and said the word no to Silas Croft's face, she stopped. You paid for it, Nathaniel said quietly. My brother paid for it, she said. He worked the dye vats. There was an accident with the vats a week later. There's always accidents around Silas when someone tells him no. My brother lived. He'll never use his right hand again, but he lived, and Silas made very sure I understood the arithmetic. Say no again, and it's the left hand. Or something worse. Something with no coming back from it. Her voice had gone flat, the way voices go when the feeling behind them is too big to be let out all at once. So I signed up to be a mail-order bride under my mother's maiden name, and I ran. Not for romance. Not because I dreamed of some rancher out west. She looked at Nathaniel. I'd have married a man twice my age with one tooth and a temper, Mr. Brooks, if it meant I got to be his wife instead of Silas Croft's property. That's the truth of what walked onto your porch last night. Now you know all of it. Now you decide. Nathaniel Brooks was quiet for a long time. Then he did the thing that Evelyn would remember later as the moment the whole rest of her life turned on its hinge, though neither of them knew it yet, standing in that plain kitchen with the coffee going cold. He walked to the wall and hung the rifle back up on its pegs. There's a room, he said, hasn't been slept in for 15 years. It's dry and it's got a lock on the inside of the door, which you're free to use, though you won't need it. My hands are decent men, and they'll be told you're a cousin of mine come to help out, and that's all any of them or the town needs to know. Nobody's writing letters east about a woman named Harper, and nobody's saying the name Croft under my roof again unless it's you saying it. Evelyn opened her mouth. I'm not finished, he said. You want to earn your keep, you can. I won't insult you by pretending you don't. But you're not a servant here, and you're not a burden here, and you're sure as hell not a bride here. You're a person who came to a door in the dark, and this time, his voice went rough again. This time the door's open. That's all. That's the whole of it. You don't owe me a thing for it. For a moment, Evelyn Harper couldn't speak at all. You said, she got out finally, you'd been asking people to leave for 15 years. I have. Then I don't understand why you'd stop for me. And Nathaniel Brooks, who had buried himself alive in a prospering house and called it a life, looked at the ruined contract in his hand and then at the woman by his fire and gave her the truest answer he had. Neither do I, he said. But I've got a feeling I'll be glad I did. He walked out to the barn after that because he'd said more words before breakfast than he usually said in a month, and he needed the smell of horses and hay to put himself back together. The foal was there. He'd near forgotten about the foal in all of it, a scrawny thing born wrong in the cold, 3 nights back legs. It couldn't figure out a mother that had turned away from it, the way mothers sometimes did when nature whispered that the effort wasn't worth it. His head hand, a leathery old cuss named Deke, had said, "Put it down and be done." Nathaniel had meant to. He'd meant to for 3 days, and hadn't, and the foal was still there lying in the straw, breathing shallow, too weak now to even lift its head. You too, huh? Nathaniel said to it. The foal's eye rolled toward him. He crouched in the straw and looked at the small dying thing and thought about doors and about the word no and about how easy it was, how natural it was to decide a struggling life wasn't worth the trouble it cost you. Deke, he called. The old man appeared in the barn door. Boss, we're not putting the foal down. Deke looked at the foal. Then he looked at his boss, and something crossed his weathered face. Surprise? Then something careful and knowing that he was too smart to say out loud. In 15 years, Deke had watched Nathaniel Brooks decide against a great many living things. "Whatever you say, boss," Deke said, "though I don't rightly know how to keep it going. Mother won't take it." "Then we'll find another way," Nathaniel said. "There's a woman up at the house. Says she nursed a foal once." He didn't know if that was true. Evelyn hadn't said any such thing. He'd invented it standing there in the straw, invented a reason to walk back up to that house and knock on his own life and let her in a little further. He recognized what he was doing even as he did it, and it frightened him nearly to death, and he did it anyway. "Go on and get her," Nathaniel said. "Tell her." He stopped. "Tell her the foal needs somebody who won't give up on it. She'll understand what I mean." Evelyn came out to the barn wrapped in a coat, 3 sizes too big. One of his old ones off the peg by the door, and she took one look at the foal in the straw and dropped to her knees beside it without a word. "How long since it fed?" she asked. "Deke says it won't take from the mother." "That's not what I asked." Her hands were already moving over the little animal, gentle and sure feeling along its ribs, its neck easing its head up. "How long?" "2 days, maybe more." Evelyn was quiet, doing sums in her head, and then she said the thing that Nathaniel Brooks would carry with him for the rest of his life, without ever quite being able to explain why. "It's not that the mother's cruel," she said, not looking up. "It's that the mother's afraid. She can feel this one's going to be hard, going to cost her. So she turns away first before it can hurt her, and she tells herself she's being sensible." Her hand smoothed the foal's damp neck. "I know something about mothers who turn away first. And I know something about the ones who get left in the straw." She looked up at him then. "We can save it," she said, "but you have to decide you're going to all the way, no half measures, because it'll break your heart 6 times before it stands up. That's the price. If you're not willing to pay it, tell me now, and I'll make it quick and painless, and that's a kindness too. But don't you dare start and quit halfway." Nathaniel Brooks stood in the door of his own barn, 15 years a widower, 15 years a man who'd never once let himself start anything he might have to lose. "Start," he said. "I am not quitting halfway, not this time, not on anything." And he did not entirely know as he said it that he wasn't talking about the foal at all. They worked over the little animal past noon and into the afternoon. Evelyn showed him how to warm milk to the right heat against the inside of his wrist, how to coax it into the foal, a swallow at a time off a rag when it was too weak to suck, how to rub its limbs to keep the blood moving. She was patient in a way that stunned him, patient the way water is patient wearing down stone, not by force, but by simply refusing to stop. 3 times the foal seemed to give up. 3 times its breathing went shallow and its eye went dull. And Deke, watching from the rail, quietly took off his hat, the way men do when a thing is about to die. And 3 times Evelyn Harper put her mouth close to the foal's ear and said things too low for anyone else to hear, and rubbed its chest and would not let it go. The 3rd time, when the little animal shuddered and its breath caught, and Nathaniel was sure, absolutely sure, that they'd lost it, the foal's legs kicked. Once. Twice. And it hauled its own head up out of the straw with a wet, indignant snort, as if to say it had changed its mind about the whole business of dying. Deke let out a low whistle and put his hat back on. Evelyn sat back on her heels, and she was crying, and this time she didn't fight it. "There," she said to the foal, fierce and soft at once. "There. You just decided to live. Nobody decided it for you. You did it your own self." Nathaniel Brooks looked at the woman on her knees in the straw of his barn, weeping over a foal that a smarter man would have shot 3 days ago, and he felt something break open in his chest that had been sealed shut so long he'd stopped believing there was anything behind it worth breaking open for. He didn't have a word for it. He wouldn't let himself reach for one. 15 years of practice made it easy to shove it back down, to turn away, to busy his hands with the milk and the rags. But it was too late. And some part of him knew it was too late, standing there in the ordinary light of an ordinary afternoon. The door was open now, and a thing had walked through it that he was never going to be able to send away. That evening, he sat on the porch after supper. She'd cooked it quietly, took over the stove without asking, and produced the first meal that had tasted like anything in years. And Deke came and leaned on the rail beside him, and rolled a cigarette, and didn't say anything for a while, which was Deke's way of saying a great deal. "That your cousin?" Deke said finally. "That's my cousin." Deke lit up. "Funny. 15 years I worked this place and never heard you had a cousin." "Big family," Nathaniel said. "We fell out of touch." Deke smoked. Down in the barn a lamp glowed where Evelyn had insisted on bedding down near the foal for the night, just in case. "Boss," Deke said, "I've knowed you a long time. Longer'n I've knowed most anybody still breathing. And I watched you turn this ranch into the finest and the loneliest spread in the territory. And I never once said a word, 'cause it wasn't my place, and 'cause a man's grief is his own to carry, however he sees fit." He tapped ash off the cigarette. "But I'm going to say one word now, and then I'll shut up about it forever." Nathaniel waited. "Good," Deke said. That was the word. Just that. Good. And then the old man ground out his cigarette on the rail and touched his hat and walked off to the bunkhouse. And Nathaniel Brooks sat alone on his porch in the dark, with the lamplight glowing down in the barn, and for the first time in 15 years, he did not feel like a man sitting up with a corpse. He felt like a man sitting up with a house that had somebody living in it. He didn't know yet how much it would cost him. He didn't know about the riders who were even then working their slow way west, or about the honorable man who'd come looking for a bride he was owed, or about the choice that was rolling toward all three of them like water rising in a wash. He only knew that the door was open, and that 15 years of grief had, without his permission and against every rule he'd ever made, just come to an end, not because the past had let go of him, but because a half-drowned stranger had crawled up onto his porch in the rain, said please, and reminded a buried man that he was still somehow against all odds alive enough to open a door. The foal stood up on the fourth morning. Nathaniel came down to the barn before dawn, out of a habit that was already changing shape. He told himself he was checking the stock, but he'd stopped lying to himself convincingly. Somewhere around the second day, and he found Evelyn asleep, sitting up against the stall wall, with her head tipped back, and the foal standing over her on 4 spindly, trembling legs, nosing at her hair like it was trying to wake her, to show her what it had done. He stopped in the doorway and didn't move for a long moment. Then the foal saw him and let out a shrill, ridiculous whinny, and Evelyn came awake all at once, the way she did, rigid hunted, until she saw the little animal on its feet above her and forgot every hard thing she'd ever learned. "He's up," she said. Her voice cracked on it. "Nathaniel, he's up." It was the first time she'd used his given name. She didn't seem to notice she'd done it. He noticed. He noticed the way a man dying of thirst notices water. "He's up." Nathaniel agreed, and his voice wasn't steady either, and neither of them said anything about that. Tja, word of the foal that wouldn't die went through the bunkhouse by breakfast, and by noon every hand on the place had found some reason to drift past the barn and look at it. Deke pretended he'd known all along it would live. The younger men who'd grown up on a ranch where the boss didn't speak, and the house sat dark, and you did your work, and drew your pay, and kept your head down, found themselves standing around a stall, grinning at a scrawny colt, and not one of them could have told you why the whole place suddenly felt lighter. Evelyn named him Lazarus. "Because he came back," she said, and old Deke laughed out loud a rusty bark of a thing and clapped his knee and said it was the finest name for a horse he'd ever heard. Nathaniel stood at the edge of it all and watched his men laugh in his own barnyard, and could not remember the last time he'd heard the sound. He should have been glad. Instead, something cold turned over in him because he knew this feeling. The feeling of a good thing arriving, and he knew the way you know the shape of a scar in the dark, that good things arriving was exactly when the world liked to take them back. She would not stop working. That was the thing that undid his careful plans faster than anything. He'd told her she wasn't a servant, that she owed him nothing, that she could rest and heal and eat like she meant it. She heard all of it and ignored all of it, and by the end of the first week, She'd reorganized a kitchen that hadn't been properly kept since Clara mended a mountain of the hands-torn shirts they hadn't even known they were allowed to complain about, and started keeping the ledger books in a hand so much neater than his own that Deke took one look and said, "Well, thank God, now we'll know if we're rich or ruined." "Why?" Nathaniel asked her one evening, watching her darn a sock by lamplight with the fierce concentration of a woman disarming a bomb. "You don't have to prove anything to me. I'm not proving it to you." She didn't look up. "I'm proving it to myself. There's a difference, and you of all people ought to know it." He didn't have an answer for that. "Where I come from," she went on, still not looking up. "The only thing that was ever mine, the only thing was the work my hands could do. They could take my wages, they took my time. Silas thought he could take my whole self and call it marriage. But the work, what my hands know how to do, that was mine. Nobody could reach in and take that." She bit off the thread. "So when I fix a thing that's broken, Nathaniel, I'm not earning my keep. I'm reminding myself I still exist." Nathaniel Brooks sat with that a while. "That why you fought so hard for the foal," he said. "Something broken you could fix." Now she looked up, and for just a second the guard came all the way down, and he saw straight through to the frightened, stubborn, unbreakable thing underneath. "No," she said quietly. "I fought so hard for the foal because somebody looked at a struggling life and said it wasn't worth the trouble. And I know exactly what that feels like from the inside. I wasn't going to let it happen in front of me. Not while I had hands." He started finding reasons to be where she was. He was not a subtle man, and he'd had no practice at it in 15 years, so his reasons were terrible. He needed the ledger. He'd left something in the kitchen. He wanted to check that the stove drew right. Evelyn, who had spent her whole life reading men's intentions the way sailors read weather, saw through every single one of them and said nothing. Because the truth was, she was inventing terrible reasons of her own. She'd bring him coffee in the barn he hadn't asked for. She'd find that the porch step wanted sweeping precisely when he sat down on the porch. They circled each other through those long spring days, like two people who'd each spent years learning that reaching for what you wanted was how you got your hand broken, and were now cautiously one small motion at a time forgetting the lesson. And every evening they talked. That was the thing neither of them had expected. The talking. It started with the foal and the ledger and the weather and the water going down in the passes, and it went night by night somewhere else. He told her things he'd never told Deke in 15 years. She told him things she'd never told a living soul. "I had a sister," he said one night, apropos of nothing, staring into the fire. "Younger. Died when I was 12. Fever same as—" He stopped. "Seems like it's always fever out here. Or water. The two things that take everybody." "What was her name?" "Ruth." "That's why you're so gentle with things that are dying," Evelyn said. "You've been standing at that particular door your whole life." He turned to look at her. Nobody had ever said a true thing about him out loud before. It felt like being seen naked. It felt, he realized with a shock, like relief. The trouble started as trouble does small. A rider came up the road on the 10th day. Not one of the men from the wagon, just a male rider working the scattered ranches, a boy of maybe 17 on a lathered horse. Nathaniel met him in the yard and took the thin packet of letters and paid the fee, and the boy, lingering the way boys do when they've got gossip too big to hold, said, "You hear about them brides, mister?" Nathaniel went very still. Behind him on the porch he heard Evelyn stop sweeping. "What brides?" he said. "Bride wagon. Got hit out past the Judith country weeks back. Bandits, they're saying." The boy leaned down, delighted with himself. "Only here's the thing. Marshall's men found the wagon, found 4 of the women banged up, but alive, walked 'em back to the railhead. But there was supposed to be 6. He held up 2 fingers. 2 missin', and the men who hit that wagon. They wasn't robbing it. Robbers'd take the horses, the goods, the money box, all that was left settin' right there. These men took nothin'. Just come wrecked the wagon, grabbed at the women, and rode off empty-handed when they didn't find what they was after." The boy shook his head with the deep satisfaction of the young telling a horror. Marshall says weren't bandits at all. Says somebody paid them men to find somebody particular. Nathaniel felt the words land one at a time like stones dropping into a well. That's so, he said. That's what they're saying. The boy gathered his reins. You keep your eyes open out here, Mr. You and yours. Somebody with money's hunting a woman across this whole territory, and them kind don't quit. He rode off in a cloud of dust. Nathaniel stood in the yard a long moment. Then he turned around. Evelyn was standing on the porch with the broom fallen at her feet, the color gone out of her face. One hand pressed flat against her chest, like she was holding something in that wanted out. 4 alive, she whispered. 4 of them are alive. And then she sat down hard on the porch step and put her face in her hands, and Nathaniel understood that for 10 days she'd been carrying 5 deaths on her conscience, 5 women she'd run and left in the dark, and she'd just learned that 4 of them had lived, and the relief of it was almost worse than the guilt had been. He crossed the yard and sat down beside her on the step. He didn't touch her. He didn't know how. But he sat close enough that she'd know he was there. You didn't leave them, he said. You ran because running drew the danger away from them. You were the one they wanted. You leaving is the reason 4 of them are walking around alive right now. She lifted her wet face. You can't know that. The boy just told us. Robbers who didn't rob. Men who came for somebody particular and rode off empty when they didn't find her. His jaw tightened. They didn't find her because she'd run up into the rocks. You saved those women, Evelyn, by being the thing worth chasing and then not being there to catch. That night neither of them slept. He knew she wasn't sleeping because he wasn't, and around midnight he heard the kitchen floor creak, and he came out to find her sitting at the table in the dark, with the ruined contract in front of her, smoothing it flat over and over with her palm like she could iron the truth out of it. He'll never stop, she said, not turning around. I keep telling myself he'll give up. That a mill and a town's worth of business is enough for any man that he'll forget a girl who told him no. But that's exactly why he won't stop. She finally looked at Nathaniel, and her eyes in the dark were terrible. It was never about wanting me. It was about the no. I said no to Silas Croft in front of his own floor supervisor, and now there are men riding across a territory they've never seen spending money that would keep a family for years, because Silas Croft cannot let a single no stand in the world with his name on it. Do you understand I'm not a woman he wants? I'm a debt he intends to collect. Nathaniel pulled out the chair across from her and sat. Then here's what we do, he said. Tomorrow I ride to town. I find out where your township is the real one, the one on that contract before the rain took it. I find out if the man you were promised to is still expecting a bride, and whether that's a place you could be safe with a husband and a name and a whole family around you that Croft can't touch without the whole county seeing. And if it is you send me on to him? Her voice was flat. And if it is, Nathaniel said, and the words cost him more than she could know, then you're free to go to a man who'll marry you and give you a name Croft can't reach through. That's not me sending you away, Evelyn. That's me trying to think of how to keep you alive. She looked at him for a long, long time across the dark table. Is that really what you want? She asked. And Nathaniel Brooks, who had rebuilt his whole soul around never again saying the true thing to a woman across a table at night, opened his mouth to lie. No, he said instead. It's not. The word hung in the air between them. Neither of them touched it. It was too new, too raw, too dangerous a man like that saying a thing like that out loud. Evelyn's breath had gone shallow. Nathaniel's hands were flat on the table like he was bracing for a blow. And then from out in the yard, a dog started barking. They had no dog. Tubbs. Nathaniel had the rifle down off the wall before the second bark. Get in the back room, he told her low and hard. Lock the door. The one you never needed, need it now. Nathaniel, go. She went. He stood inside the door with the lamp doused and his heart slamming and listened. The barking came again. It was Deke's old cattle dog down at the bunkhouse, the one that slept out and never made a sound unless something was moving in the dark that shouldn't be. Nathaniel eased the door open a crack. A horse. Just the one coming slow up the road, a shape darker than the dark, and a man's voice calling out, not sneaking, calling out plain, "Hello, the house. Hello, I mean no harm. I'm lost. I've been riding since sundown and my horse is done in." Nathaniel didn't lower the rifle. "You're on Brooks' land," he called back. "State your business or state it from further off. My business is a dry patch of ground and directions to Miller's Crossing, if you'll give 'em, and I'll bless your name, and be gone by light." The man had come close enough now to see in the starlight an ordinary enough traveler, older gray, in his beard, hands held wide and empty. "Name's Hollis. I'm a stock buyer out of Cheyenne, and I am, sir, thoroughly and completely lost." It was nothing. A lost traveler. It happened. Except that Deke's dog was still growling low the way it did at wolves and not at strangers, and except that a man's horse that was truly done in didn't stand as square and rested as that one did, and except that a stock buyer out of Cheyenne, who was thoroughly lost, didn't have his right hand resting quite so easy and quite so ready down by his hip. Nathaniel had survived 15 years alone in hard country by trusting exactly this feeling. "Miller's Crossing is south," he said, not moving from the door, keeping the rifle where the man could see it. "Back the way you came, take the fork at the Split Rock, follow the creek down. Half a day's ride. There's water at the Split Rock, your horse'll thank you." "Much obliged." The man didn't turn his horse. "Mighty lonely spread out here for one fella. You run this all alone." "I've got 12 hands sleeping 50 feet from where you're sitting," Nathaniel said, "and every one of them's a light sleeper. Now you've got your directions, friend. Water's south. So are you." For a moment, the man didn't move. Then he touched his hat brim, slow, easy, a gesture that somehow managed to feel like a threat, and turned his horse and rode back down the road at a walk unhurried like a man who had gotten exactly what he'd come for. Nathaniel stood in the door until the dark swallowed him. Then he stood there another hour. The man never once in all his talk of being lost had asked the name of the ranch or the man he was talking to, which meant he already knew. "He was one of them," Evelyn said. She'd come out of the back room white as bone. "Wasn't he?" "I don't know that." "You know it. I know it." She wrapped her arms around herself. How did they get here? This is 400 miles from that mill. Nobody knows I'm here. You called me your cousin. Somebody talked." Nathaniel set the rifle on the table. His mind was already grinding through it cold and fast, the way it used to work before he'd let it rust. That mail rider, the boy, fresh gossip like that, he's carrying it to every ranch on his route. You hear about them brides? Some hand at some spread says Funny Brooks up the valley took on a lady cousin about the same time nobody knew he had. It doesn't take much. A man with money buys a lot of ears. Evelyn sank into the chair. "Then I've brought it to your door. Exactly the thing you said, your door in the dark, and I've—" "Stop!" He crouched down in front of her chair so their eyes were level. "You listen to me. You didn't bring anything to my door. Silas Croft did. A man 400 miles away who can't stand a woman having a will of her own, he brought it. You are the one thing in this whole ugly business that isn't to blame for any part of it, and I will not sit here and watch you take on his sin as well as your own grief. Do you hear me?" She was crying again silently, the way she cried. No sound, just the tears running down while her face stayed still, a woman who'd learned young that crying out loud only ever made things worse. 15 years ago, I shut a door and a woman died, Nathaniel said low and fierce. I have spent every day since wishing to God I could go back and open it. Well, I can't go back. But there's a door open now and there's a woman on the right side of it, and there is not a man alive, not Croft, not his hired dogs, not the whole of hell who's going to get through me to shut it again. That's not a promise I'm making to you, Evelyn. That's a fact about the world I intend to prove. She looked at him. And then she did something that surprised them both. She reached out and put her hand against the side of his face. It was the first time either of them had touched the other on purpose, not out of doctoring or necessity. Just one human hand laid against one human face because it needed to be there. "You're going to get yourself killed," she whispered, trying to make up for something that was never as much your fault as you've decided it was. "Maybe," Nathaniel said. He didn't move away from her hand. He couldn't have if the barn had been on fire. "But it'll be the first thing I've done in 15 years that I'm not ashamed of, so let me." Then, he rode to town at first light with two of his best hands and a plan. He didn't go to the marshal. The marshal was a good enough man for cattle rustlers and drunk cowboys, but a hired killer paid out of a far-off city was above his weight, and worse, a marshal meant records, telegrams, a name in a ledger somewhere that money could find. Nathaniel went instead to the one man in the territory he trusted with a secret. An old friend from his own father's time, a lawyer named Ambrose Webb, who'd handled the ranch's papers for 30 years and had a mind like a bear trap and a discretion like the grave. He laid it all out. The contract, the name that had washed away, Croft, the mill, the brother's hand, the wagon, the rider in the night, all of it. Ambrose Webb listened without a word, his old eyes half shut, and when Nathaniel finished, he sat a while longer, and then he said, "You want to know the township on that contract, where she was headed, who the groom was?" "I do. Because you're thinking that if you can get her lawfully married into some established family, before Croft's men close in, she becomes somebody's wife, with a name and a claim and a household, and a great deal harder to snatch off the frontier quiet-like." Webb nodded slowly. "It's good thinking. It's exactly right. A single woman with no name is prey. A married woman inside a family is a scandal to touch. You've thought this through. So you'll help me find him, the groom." Ambrose Webb looked at his old friend for a long moment. "Nathaniel," he said gently, "I've known you since you were a boy. I stood up at your near wedding, and I stood at the graveside of the woman it should have been for. And I have watched you turn to stone for 15 years. He leaned forward. "So I have to ask you as your lawyer and your friend both. When you find this groom, this good established safe man who can protect her with his name, are you going to be able to hand her over to him?" Nathaniel didn't answer. "Because I'm looking at your face right now," Webb said, "and I do not think you are." He rode home slower than he'd ridden out. Webb was already at work. He had contacts records, a network of clerks and colleagues that spanned 3 territories, and he'd promised to have the township and the groom's name inside a week sooner if the roads cooperated. It was the right move. It was the smart move. It was, Nathaniel told himself the whole long ride home, the only move that gave Evelyn a real chance at a life Croft couldn't reach into. And every mile Ambrose Webb's question rode along behind him like a second horse. "Are you going to be able to hand her over to him?" He got back to the ranch near dusk, and the first thing he saw was Evelyn in the yard with the foal Lazarus teaching the wobbling little thing to follow a rope. And she was laughing. Actually, laughing, head back at some ridiculous thing the colt had done, and old Deke was leaning on the fence laughing too, and 2 of the younger hands, and the whole yard was gold with the low light and full of the sound of it. He reined up at the edge of it and did not ride in. He just sat his horse and looked. This was what he'd done. This was the thing he'd built in 15 years of loneliness, and this was the thing this woman had walked in and undone in 15 days. The silence, the dark house, the men who did their work and drew their pay and never smiled. She'd cracked it all open just by refusing to be sent away, just by fixing what was broken because she still had hands. And in a week, Ambrose Webb was going to hand him a name and a township, and Nathaniel Brooks was going to be expected to send her down the road to another man's ranch for her own safety, because it was the smart thing, and the right thing, and the only thing. Evelyn saw him then. She lifted her hand and waved him in, still laughing, and called out, "He can follow the rope now. Come see Nathaniel, come see." And Nathaniel Brooks understood, sitting there on his horse in the gold light, with a killer somewhere out in the dark, and a good man's name coming toward him on a lawyer's letter, that Ambrose Webb had been exactly right. He was not going to be able to hand her over. He didn't know yet what he was going to do about that, but he knew that much all the way down to the bone, and he knew it was going to break something in him, no matter which way it fell. He rode in. He got down off his horse. He went and looked at the foal, and he said the right things, and he even laughed a little, and the whole time his heart was pulling in two directions at once. And Evelyn, who read men the way sailors read weather, watched his face and slowly stopped laughing. "You found something in town," she said quietly as the hands drifted off toward supper. "Didn't you?" "I set something in motion," he said. "Webb's finding your township, your groom's name, where you were meant to go. And then," he made himself say it, "and then, if it's a place you'd be safe a family a name. Croft can't reach through, then that's a chance at a real life. Safer than anything I can give you out here alone." Evelyn was quiet. The foal nosed at her pocket for the sugar she kept there. "You keep saying that," she said. "Safe. You keep building me a safe cage and calling it kindness." She looked up at him, and there was something in her face that was half anger and half something else entirely. "I ran 400 miles from a man who wanted to decide my life for my own good. I'll be damned if I let the next one do it gentler." "Evelyn, no, you listen now the way you made me listen last night." She stepped close. The foal stumbled between them, and neither of them looked at it. "You want to know where I'd be safe? I'd be safe wherever I got to choose. That's the whole of it. That's all I've ever wanted in my entire life. Not a rich man, not a poor man, not a safe man or a dangerous one. Just to be the one who decides." Her voice dropped. "So you go on and let your lawyer find my groom. Find the whole map of where I was supposed to go. And then, Nathaniel Brooks, you're going to lay it all in front of me, every piece, and you're going to let me choose. Not decide for my safety, not send me on for my own good. Let me choose. Because if you take that from me too, even to save my life, then there was no point in any of it, and I might as well have stayed and married Silas Croft in the first place." "Yeah, Chad." He couldn't sleep that night either. He lay in the dark in the room he'd built for Clara 15 years ago, and never once shared, and he listened to the small sounds of the house, a house with somebody living in it, and he turned Evelyn's words over and over. Let me choose. It was the one thing he was worst at. He'd spent 15 years not letting anyone choose anything himself, least of all. He'd decided back at that riverside grave that choosing was too dangerous, that wanting was too dangerous, that the only safe way to live was to want nothing and choose nothing and let no one and nothing through the door. And it had worked. God help him, it had worked. He'd felt nothing for 15 years, and nothing had been able to hurt him. And now here was a woman asking him to do the single hardest thing he could imagine, to find the tool that could take her away from him, hand it to her, and then step back, and let her use it however she wished. To love someone enough to let them choose to leave. He didn't know if he had it in him. He honestly did not know. Toward morning, he heard her get up. He heard the kitchen floor creak, heard her put the coffee on, heard her go out. He could track her through the whole dark house by now, knew her footsteps from the wind, and he got up and pulled on his boots and followed, because he'd decided lying there that whatever else happened, he wasn't going to let another dawn come without her knowing the truth of what was in him. He found her on the porch, wrapped in his old coat, watching the light come up gray over the eastern hills. He came and stood beside her. He didn't touch her. He'd rehearsed a dozen ways to say it, and every one of them had crumbled. And so, in the end, he just said the plainest, truest thing he had, the way he'd learned to from her. When Webb sends that name, he said, I'll lay it all in front of you, every piece, and I'll let you choose. I swear it to you. He swallowed. But I need you to know one thing before you choose so it's an honest choice and not a blind one. I need you to know. He stopped. 15 years of silence fought him for the words. Nathaniel, she said softly, I need you to know that I don't want you to go. He said all in a rush before the fear could shut his mouth again. Not for your safety, not for your own good, not down the road to any safe man's ranch. I want you to stay. Here, not as my cousin, and not as a hand, and not as somebody I'm keeping safe. I want... His voice broke clean in half. I have not wanted anything in 15 years, Evelyn. I made sure of it. And you walked up onto that porch half dead in the rain, and now I want something so bad I can't breathe around it. And it's you, and I don't have the first idea how to say it better than that, because I forgot how. I forgot how to want. And you made me remember, and it is the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me, including the day they pulled Clara out of that river." Evelyn had gone completely still. The light came up around them. Somewhere behind the barn, a rooster crowed. The foal in its stall whickered for its breakfast. And Evelyn Harper turned from the sunrise and looked at the man beside her. This stone that a stranger's pleas had cracked wide open, and Nathaniel saw that she was crying again, but not the silent, still learned young way she cried when the world hurt her. She was crying the other way. The way people cry when something they'd stopped letting themselves hope for turns out against all sense to be real. "Then here's what you need to know before I choose," she said, and her voice shook. "I stopped being afraid to fall asleep about a week ago. First time since I was 17 years old that I've laid down at night and not kept one ear open for a door. And it's not because of the locks or the 12 hands or the rifle on your wall." She pressed her hand flat against his chest. "It's because of what's in here. That's the choice I've already half made, Nathaniel, and no lawyer's letter is going to change it. But I want to make it clean. I want to look Croft's whole world in the eye and turn my back on it because I chose to, not because I was hiding from it. Can you understand that?" "Yes," he said. "God help me, yes. It's the only thing I understand anymore." They stood on the porch a long time after that, not touching except for her hand on his chest, and his heart hammering up against it, and neither of them said anything else, because there wasn't anything else that needed saying. Behind them the sun cleared the hills, down the long road that ran to town, and beyond it, to the whole rest of the hard and dangerous world, a rider was already coming. Several riders, small and dark and patient, moving at the unhurried pace of men who have been paid well and told there is no hurry, only certainty. But that was still hours off. For now, there was only the porch and the light and a woman's hand over a man's heart, and 15 years of grief finally beginning to thaw. The foal whinnied again, insistent. Evelyn laughed, wet and helpless. "I have to feed Lazarus." "I'll help you," Nathaniel said. And for the first time in 15 years, he meant it, all of it. Every word, the "I'll help you," and everything underneath it. And he walked down off the porch into the new light beside her, toward the barn, toward the small living thing that had refused to die, toward whatever was coming down that long road together. The riders came 4 days later, and they came in daylight, which was somehow worse. Nathaniel had braced for the dark. He'd slept in the front room every night since the stranger who called himself Hollis, the rifle within reach, the hands rotating a watch he'd invented without telling them why. He'd expected them to slip up in the black hours the way the first one had. Instead, they rode up the long road at mid-morning, 4 of them easy in the saddle, in no hurry at all. Men who wanted to be seen because being seen was itself a message. "We know where you are. We're not hiding anymore. There's nothing left to hide." Deke saw them first from the corral and let out a whistle, 2 short and 1 long, the signal they'd worked out. By the time the 4 riders reached the yard, Nathaniel was on the porch with the rifle across his arms and 6 of his hands spread wide behind the fences with whatever they'd grabbed, and Evelyn was inside with the door bolted and old Deke posted at the back. The lead rider drew up and touched his hat. "Mr. Brooks," he said pleasantly, "you're a hard man to visit." "Then don't," Nathaniel said. "Right on. Now that's no way to treat travelers." The man folded his hands on his saddle horn. He was lean and gray-eyed, and there was nothing hurried or hot about him that was the frightening part. He had the calm of a man doing a job he'd done many times. "We're looking for a woman. Young, dark hair. Answers to Evelyn, though she might have given you another name. We have reason to believe she's taken shelter on this ranch, and we're here to collect her and bring her home to the man she rightfully belongs to. There's no such woman here. That's a shame, because we've come a long way, and the man who sent us is a man who gets what he's paid for." The rider's gray eyes moved over the fences, counting the hands, unimpressed. "You've got some men. I'll grant you that. But you should understand something, Mr. Brooks, before this goes any further than it has to. We are not the last 4 men Mr. Croft can afford to send. We're the first. You could shoot all 4 of us dead in your yard this morning, and it would change exactly nothing except that next month 8 more would come, and they wouldn't be so polite as to knock." He smiled thin and cold. Wealth like his doesn't get tired. It doesn't get discouraged. It just keeps writing checks. So the only question that matters is whether you'd like to hand over one woman who isn't even yours, or bury however many of your own men it takes to keep her. It was the truest and most terrible thing anyone had said to Nathaniel Brooks in 15 years, and he knew it, and he hated it because he had no answer for it. Because the man was right. He didn't get to answer at all, because at that moment there came the sound of more horses on the road, many more, a whole party of them coming up fast, and every man in the yard turned, and the 4 riders' hands drifted toward their guns, and for one long 6 second, Nathaniel thought, "This is it, this is the 8, they lied about the timing," and he brought the rifle up. But the men who crested the rise were not Crofts. They rode under no colors and wore no badges, but there were 7 of them, hard used and trail dirty, and at their head rode a big man in a plain black coat with a face like weathered oak and eyes that took in the whole yard. The 4 riders, the spread hands, the man on the porch with the rifle in a single sweep, and understood all of it at once. He reined up between Croft's men and the house, deliberately between. "Morning," he said to no one and everyone. "Somebody want to tell me why 4 men are sitting a yard with their hands on their irons?" The lead rider's calm slipped for just a half second. "This is a private matter, friend. Ride on." "It stopped being private," the big man said, "when I counted 4 guns pointed at one house." He turned his head, and his eyes found Nathaniel on the porch. "You Brooks?" "I'm Brooks." "Then I believe," the big man said, "we've got business, you and I, though I'll be damned if it's the business I rode out here expecting." He swung down off his horse slow and unafraid, right there in the middle of 4 hired killers, and he pulled off his glove and held up his hand, and in it was a paper. A contract. The twin, but for the water damage of the one that lay folded on Nathaniel's kitchen table. "Name's Jacob Turner," he said. "I've been hunting a bride wagon for 6 weeks, and unless I miss my guess, Mr. Brooks, you're the man who's been sheltering the woman I sent for." "Does." The whole yard held its breath. Croft's 4 riders looked at Turner. Turner's 7 looked at Croft's 4. And Nathaniel Brooks on his porch understood in one lurching instant that the good man had arrived at the exact same moment as the evil one, and that he now had 2 forces in his yard, both claiming the same woman, and that the wrong word from anybody was going to turn his ground into a killing field. He made a decision. "Turner," he said, "get your men down off their horses and inside my fence. Do it now, do it slow, and keep your hands where these 4 can see them." He turned to the gray-eyed rider. "And you've said your piece. You've made your threat. I heard it. But you're outnumbered near 2 to 1 in my yard now, and whatever your boss is paying you, it isn't enough to die this morning for it. So here's my counteroffer. You ride off. You tell Croft his woman's business is being handled by men with lawyers and guns and land, and that the next message he sends had better come on paper through a court, because the next man who rides up my road uninvited leaves across a saddle. Now get." For a moment, the gray-eyed man weighed it. Nathaniel watched him do the arithmetic. 7. Turner men 6. Brooks hands, 1 rancher with a rifle against 4. Bad odds for a job that could wait. "This isn't over," the man said. "Nothing ever is," Nathaniel said. "Ride." And they rode. Slow, unhurried, insolent to the last. But they rode, and Nathaniel didn't lower the rifle until they were specks on the road, and neither did anybody else, because everybody in that yard knew the man had spoken true. They'd be back, with more. Only then did Nathaniel turn to the big man standing patient in his yard. "Mr. Turner," he said, "I think you'd best come in and meet the woman you've come 400 miles for. Though I'll warn you now, it's not going to go the way you're expecting." "Mr.," said Jacob Turner, looking at the door where a bolt was even now scraping open. "Nothing about this whole business has gone the way I expected. I don't imagine that's about to start." Evelyn came out onto the porch. She'd heard it all through the door. The threat, the arrival, the standoff, and she came out white and steady, and she looked at Jacob Turner. And Jacob Turner looked at her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. He took off his hat. "Miss Harper," he said. "Mr. Turner, I owe you an apology," Jacob Turner said, "that I don't rightly know how to make big enough." His weathered face worked. "I sent for a bride like a man orders seed from a catalog, and I never once stopped to think what it meant 6 women packed onto a wagon and shipped across country to strangers at the mercy of whatever met them on the road. When word came the wagon was hit, He stopped. "I've spent 6 weeks and near everything I had riding this territory looking for you and the others. Found 2 of the women safe at the railhead. Helped get them home east, the ones that wanted to go. And I kept looking for the rest, because it was my letter that put you on that road, and a man ought to answer for what his letters do." Evelyn's guard flickered. This was not the man she'd braced herself for. Not a Croft, not a buyer. A decent, plain, guilty man who'd ridden himself ragged, trying to undo a wrong he'd stumbled into. "You didn't put me on that road, Mr. Turner," she said quietly. "I put myself on it. I was running from something long before your letter ever reached me. I heard some of that just now, through the door." Turner turned his hat in his big hands. This Croft. He the reason 4 men were pointing guns at this house. He is. Then whatever else is true. Jacob Turner said, "You're not going back to any such man. Not while I've got breath. That much I can promise you standing right here no matter what else we decide." He drew a breath. "But I'll say the rest of it plain, because you deserve plain. The agreement still stands far as I'm concerned. I'm a widower with a good ranch 2 days south, a decent house, cattle land free and clear. I'm not a young man, and I won't pretend to be a romantic one. I lost my wife 8 years back, and I've been rattling around alone since. But I'd be a fair husband. I'd never raise a hand nor a voice to you. And a woman married into my family with my name and my land around her is a woman even a rich man thinks twice about touching." He met her eyes honest and unflinching. "You signed to be my bride. I've come to honor that if you'll have it. But you're free, Miss Harper. Free as the day I sent that letter, and freer, because now you know your own mind. Nobody's forcing anything. I just came to keep my word and offer you the safe life I promised. The rest is yours to say." And there it was. The safe life. The name Croft couldn't reach through. The established family, the land free and clear, the fair and gentle husband who would never raise voice nor hand. Everything Nathaniel had ridden to town to find for her. Everything Ambrose Webb was still at that very hour, searching the records to locate delivered whole in the flesh, standing hat in hand in the yard. It was in every practical particular the answer to the exact problem Nathaniel had set out to solve. And it was standing 4 feet from the woman he loved, offering her the one thing Nathaniel could not safety. Nathaniel Brooks said nothing. That was the hardest thing he had ever done, and he did it standing perfectly still on his own porch, with his heart being torn slowly in 2. He said nothing. He did not say, "She's staying." He did not say, "She's mine." He did not say the true thing, screaming up inside him, which was, "Don't you dare take her. Not when I just learned how to want again, not when the door just opened," because he had promised her. On this same porch in the gray dawn 4 days back he had sworn it. "I'll lay it all in front of you. And I'll let you choose." And here was the whole of it laid in front of her, not by a lawyer's letter, but by fate itself. The safe road made flesh. And if he opened his mouth now, if he tipped the scale 1 grain, then he was no better than Silas Croft. Just gentler about it. A man deciding a woman's life for her own good. I ran 400 miles from a man who wanted to decide my life for my own good. I'll be damned if I let the next one do it gentler. She'd said that to him. And he'd said, "Yes, I understand," and he'd meant it, and now understanding it was costing him everything he had. So he stood there, and he said nothing, and he watched the woman he loved consider another man's proposal, and he let the silence be his gift to her, the hardest, purest thing he had to give. The room he would not fill, the choice he would not touch. Evelyn looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment, and he knew what she was doing. She was waiting for him to speak, to claim her, to make it easy by making it his decision instead of hers. And he understood that if he loved her, the one thing he must not do was rescue her from the weight of choosing. So he held her eyes, and he gave the smallest shake of his head. "No, I won't. This is yours." And something moved across Evelyn Harper's face that he would spend the rest of his life trying to understand: grief and gratitude, and a kind of terrible dawning love all at once. Because he had just done the single thing that proved he was nothing like the men who'd owned her. He had refused to own her. Even now, even here, even when it cost him his own heart. She turned back to Jacob Turner. "Mr. Turner," she said. Her voice was steady. "You are a better man than the whole world led me to expect. And I want you to know I mean that, because I don't say it lightly, and because what I'm about to ask has nothing to do with any lack in you." Turner went still. "I'm not going to give you my answer today," Evelyn said. Nathaniel's heart stopped. He'd expected her to say no. He'd hoped God forgive him. He'd hoped she would say no here now with him standing right there and end it. Or he'd feared she'd say yes, choose the safe road, break his heart clean. He had not expected this, the withholding, the third thing, the refusal to be rushed. "I've spent my whole life," Evelyn went on, "being handed decisions already made. My father decided I'd work the mill at 14. The mill decided my wages and my hours and where I slept. Silas Croft decided he'd marry me, and decided my brother would pay when I said no. Even coming west." She glanced at the folded contract visible through the door on the table. "Even that wasn't a choice so much as a running. The only decision I ever truly made in 24 years was to say one word to Silas Croft's face, and I paid for that word with my brother's hand." Her chin came up. "So I'll not make the biggest decision of my life in a yard in an hour, with men's guns barely off the road, and 2 roads laid in front of me by 2 men who both, I believe, mean me well. I'll not be stampeded into it, however kindly. I need to think. I need to see. And then I'll choose clear-eyed, and it'll be mine, and I'll live by it without a backward glance whichever way it falls." Jacob Turner looked at her a long moment, and then, to Nathaniel's surprise, the big man smiled a slow, tired, genuinely warm smile. "Miss Harper?" he said. "That's about the best answer I ever heard to any question. My late wife would have liked you." He put his hat back on. "Take your time. Take all you need. I'll camp my men down by the creek, will not crowd you, and God knows an extra 7 guns near this place tonight can't hurt, given who else is roaming. When you've decided, you send word. If it's no, I'll ride home with no hard feelings and count myself lucky to have met an honest woman on this earth. If it's yes," he shrugged his big shoulders, "then I reckon I'll have gotten far more than I deserved out of a foolish catalog letter." He touched his hat brim. "Either way, you're free. That's the only part I insist on." And he walked back to his horse, and he and his 7 men rode down to make camp by the creek, and left Nathaniel and Evelyn standing on the porch, and the whole enormous weight of what came next hanging in the air between them. She wanted to ride to Turner's ranch and see it for herself. She told Nathaniel that evening, standing in the kitchen with the lamp between them and the contract on the table, like a third person in the room, and Nathaniel felt the ground drop away under him. "You're going to his ranch," he said. "I'm going to see it. There's a difference." She was folding a dish towel with the terrible precision she used when her hands needed something to do. "I'm not going to marry a house Nathaniel, but I'm not going to choose blind either. He's offering me a whole life. I owe it to myself, to the 24 years I spent, never getting to see the thing before it was decided for me to at least look at it with my own eyes. Croft's men are out there. I'll have 7 of Turner's guns around me, and Turner himself, who's spent 6 weeks proving he'll spend his last dollar keeping women safe." She set the towel down. "I'll be safer riding to his ranch surrounded by armed men than I am sitting here, and you know it." He did know it. That was the hell of it. "And when you get there," Nathaniel said low, And it's a good house and good land, and a good safe gentle man who'll never raise voice nor hand. Then I'll have a hard choice to make, and I'll make it." She came around the table. "Nathaniel, look at me." He did. "You did something today I will never forget as long as I live. You had me. Do you understand? All you had to do was open your mouth. One word from you standing there, and I'd have turned to you in that yard without a second thought because I love you, you great locked-up fool. I've loved you since the morning you told me to eat like I meant it. One word, and I was yours." His breath caught. "And you didn't say it," she said, and her eyes filled. "You stood there, and you tore yourself in half, and you gave me the silence instead, because you understood that a love that has to win me isn't love, it's just Croft with better manners. You loved me enough to let me choose against you. Do you have the faintest idea what that did to me?" She pressed her palm flat to his chest, the way she had at the sunrise. "No man has ever once in my life wanted my choosing more than he wanted me. You're the first, and that is precisely why I have to go look at Turner's ranch. Because you of all people, you earned me the right to choose free. And I'm not going to dishonor what you did by choosing scared or grateful or cornered. I'm going to go look the safe life dead in the eye. And then I'm going to come back here and choose it or choose you as a free woman deciding her own life for the first time in 24 years. Nathaniel Brooks stood with her hand on his heart and understood that she had just told him she loved him and might still leave him in the same breath, and that both halves of it were true, and that this was what it cost to love someone free. "Then go," he heard himself say. "Go and look. Take Deke with you. Besides, I trust him with my life, and he'll trust you with his." His voice broke. "And Evelyn, whatever you choose, whatever you decide when you've seen it all, I want you to know I'll honor it. If you come back and tell me you're marrying Turner, I'll dance at your wedding, and I'll spend the rest of my days glad you're safe and free somewhere even if it's not here. That's love too. I didn't know that 4 weeks ago. You taught me." She kissed him then. It was the first time, and it was not gentle. It was fierce and full of tears, and years of things neither of them had let themselves want a kiss. Like a door blown open in a storm. And when it ended, she pressed her forehead to his, and they stood there breathing each other in. And neither of them said anything, because there was nothing left that words could carry. Then she stepped back. "I'll leave at first light," she said. 2 days there, a day to see it true, 2 days back, 5 days. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, that fierce old gesture. "You keep the door open, Nathaniel Brooks. 5 days. That's all I ask. You keep it open, and you keep yourself alive with Croft's dog sniffing round, and you wait for me to come back and tell you what I chose." "I'll keep it open," he said. "I'll keep it open if it's the last thing I ever do." He did not know as he said it how close to true that would come, because down by the creek, Jacob Turner's men had a fire going and a watch set. And out beyond the far dark ridges, the gray-eyed man and his 3 riders had made a cold camp with no fire at all, and they had watched a woman kiss a man on a lit porch through a spyglass, and they had understood exactly what they were looking at. And the gray-eyed man had said quietly to the rider beside him, "There, now we know which one she loves. Croft'll want to know that. Croft'll want to know that very much." And he'd folded the spyglass, and he'd smiled his thin, cold smile in the dark, and he'd said, "A man doesn't have to catch a woman if he can catch the thing she'd come running back for." She left at first light with Deke at her side, and 4 of Turner's men riding escort, and Nathaniel Brooks stood on his porch and watched her go, until the road took her, and then he kept standing there long after, because a man who has just learned to want something has no idea what to do with himself once it rides away. The house went quiet behind him the way it used to, but it was a different quiet now. Before, the silence had been a thing he'd built and lived inside like a shell. Now it was just an absence, and it had a shape, and the shape was hers. "She'll be back in 5 days, he said out loud to no one. The foal Lazarus whickered at him from the corral rail as if to argue the point. The first day was the worst kind of quiet. Nathaniel worked himself half to death because working was the only thing that had ever kept the inside of his own head at arm's length. He mended fence that didn't need mending. He rode the whole East Range counting cattle he'd counted the week before. And the whole time, one thought circled him like a hawk. She's going to see a good house and good land and a good man, and she's going to be sensible. He'd told her he'd dance at her wedding. He'd meant it when he said it. He tried very hard to keep meaning it. On the second day, Ambrose Webb's letter finally came. The old lawyer had done exactly what he'd promised. Found the township, found the groom's name, found the whole map of where Evelyn had been meant to go. Nathaniel opened it standing in the yard, and read the name at the center of it, and let out a breath that was almost a laugh because it didn't matter anymore. The name was Jacob Turner. Webb had spent 2 weeks and a small fortune in telegrams to find out the very thing that had ridden into the yard on its own 2 days ago. But there was more in the letter, and the more was not funny at all. Webb had in the course of his searching turned over something about Silas Croft. "I made inquiries east through a colleague in the courts," the old man wrote in his crabbed hand. Croft is not merely a mill owner with a bruised pride, Nathaniel. He is a man with a great deal to hide. 2 years past, a young woman in his employ died in what was recorded as an accident at the dye vats. There were whispers she had refused him, as your Miss Harper did. The inquest was closed with unusual speed, and the coroner has since bought himself a fine house. I tell you this so you understand what you are dealing with. This is not a man protecting his honor. This is a man who has killed before to silence a woman who said no, and who cannot afford to let another one live free and talking 400 miles away. She is not a prize he wants back. She is a witness he needs dead. Guard her accordingly and burn this letter." Nathaniel read it twice. Then he did not burn it. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket over his heart, where the truth could write against him, because he had a cold certainty rising in him that he was going to need it. That someday in front of the right people, that paper was going to matter. And he understood standing in his yard on the second morning that the stakes had just changed entirely. This was no longer a question of whether Evelyn chose him or Turner. It was a question of whether Croft would let her choose anything at all. Meanwhile, 2 days south, Evelyn was seeing a good house and good land and a good man. Turner's ranch was everything he'd said, and nothing he'd bragged about because he hadn't bragged at all. The house was solid and clean if plainly kept in the way of a widower who'd stopped noticing curtains 8 years back. The land ran green and well watered. The cattle were fat. There was a woman who cooked and 2 hired families who lived on the place, and every one of them spoke of Jacob Turner, the way people speak of a man who has been fair to them for years. Not warmly exactly, but with the deep, unshowy respect that can't be bought or faked. Deke, riding at her side through it all, said little. But on the second evening, as they sat their horses looking out over Turner's good green valley, the old man finally spoke. "It's a fine place," Deke said. "It is. Man's a good man. Anybody can see it. He is." Deke was quiet a moment. Then he said, "You want to know what I think, Missy? Or you want me to keep it behind my teeth like the boss pays me to?" Evelyn almost smiled. "Say it, Deke." "I think," Deke said slowly, "that this here's the kind of life a woman's supposed to want. Safe, sound, a good man, good land, never a worry about the roof or the winter or the wolf at the door." He turned his weathered face to her. "And I think you already know it ain't the one you want. I think you knowed it before we ever left. And I think the only reason we rode 2 days to look at it is 'cause you needed to be able to say for the rest of your life that you looked at the safe thing with your own 2 eyes and turned it down of your own free will. Which," he shrugged, "is about the most sensible, foolish thing I ever heard of a person doing. So look your fill. And then let's go home." Evelyn looked at the good green valley a long time. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "That I'd already decided." "Same way the boss knowed," Deke said. "You go still when somebody talks about Brooks. Whole rest of the time you're wound up tight as a watch spring ready to bolt. But somebody says his name and you go still all over like a body that's finally set its bags down." He clucked to his horse. "I worked that man's ranch 15 years, and I watched him die a little every single day, and I'd about given up on ever seeing him alive again. Then you crawled up his porch half drowned, and he came back from the dead." Deke's voice roughened. "So no, I don't reckon you decided. I reckon you knowed. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference in the world, Gatag," she told Jacob Turner that night. She found him on his own porch after supper, and she stood in front of the honest, tired, decent man who'd ridden 6 weeks to make right a wrong that was never fully his, and she gave him the truth clean because he'd earned nothing less. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I'm not going to marry you." He nodded slowly like a man who'd known it a while and was only now hearing it said. "There's another man." "There is. Brooks." Brooks. Jacob Turner looked out over his good land in the dark. "Well," he said, "I can't say it doesn't sting a little. A man rides 400 miles he likes to think it's toward something." He was quiet a moment, and then to her surprise he chuckled low. "But I'll tell you the truth, Miss Harper. When I watched him stand on that porch and say not one word while you decided, I thought to myself, that's a better man than me. Because I don't know that I'd have had the spine to keep quiet with everything on the line. I think I'd have grabbed. Most men would have grabbed." He turned to her. "A man who won't grab even when he's dying to, that's the man to marry. I mean that. You go home to him with my blessing for whatever a jilted rancher's blessing is worth." "It's worth a great deal," Evelyn said. "And Mr. Turner, there's one more thing. The man hunting me, Silas Croft. His men are still out there, and they're not going to stop because I've chosen. If anything, they'll—" She stopped. "They'll be worse now." Jacob Turner's decent face went hard. "Then here's what we'll do," he said. "I've got 7 men and a personal disgust for anybody who'd hunt a woman across a territory. You've got Brooks and his hands. That's a lot of guns between us, Miss Harper, and I'd take it kindly if you'd let me and mine ride you home and stay on a few days till this Croft business is settled one way or another. Not as a suitor, as a man who doesn't much like the world Croft's trying to make. Will you allow it?" And Evelyn Harper, who had spent her whole life learning that men who offered help wanted payment, looked at Jacob Turner and understood she was looking at the rarest thing on the frontier, a good man asking nothing. "I'll allow it," she said. "And Mr. Turner, thank you, for being exactly what the world told me no man ever is." But Croft's men did not wait for the roads to be settled. They had watched the party ride south, and they had counted the guns, and they had made the same arithmetic the gray-eyed man always made, which was that you don't hit the strong point when there's a weak one lying open. And the weak point was the ranch. With Evelyn gone. With Deke gone. With 4 of Turner's men gone as escort, and half of Nathaniel's hands ranging the far pastures, and Nathaniel Brooks alone in the big house on the 4th night, with a lawyer's letter over his heart, and a woman due home the next day. They came in the black hour before dawn. No dog barked. They'd seen to the dog first quiet from the dark. Nathaniel woke to the smell of smoke and the crackle of the barn already going up, and he understood in one sick heartbeat exactly what they'd done. They'd fired the barn to draw him out. The barn, where Lazarus was. Every instinct he had screamed, "Don't, it's a trap, it's bait. Stay in the house, stay behind the walls." 15 years of a man who never opened a door, never took a risk, never ran toward the fire. And then he thought of a woman on her knees in the straw saying, "Don't you dare start and quit halfway." And he grabbed his rifle and he ran out into the dark toward the burning barn, because the old Nathaniel would have stayed safe behind the walls and let the small living thing burn, and that Nathaniel was dead. She'd killed him. On purpose. With bread and flowers and a foal that wouldn't die. He got the barn door open. He got Lazarus and the other panicked horses out into the yard, his lungs full of smoke, his hands scorched, and he was turning back toward the house when the gray-eyed man stepped out of the dark with a pistol already leveled and said pleasantly, "Evening, Mr. Brooks. Told you it wasn't over." They didn't kill him. That was the thing Nathaniel understood as they took his rifle and bound his hands. They weren't going to kill him, not yet, and the reason chilled him worse than any bullet. The gray-eyed man crouched in front of him in the light of the burning barn and explained it like a patient teacher. "Here's how it's going to go," he said. "The woman comes home tomorrow. We know she's coming home. We've watched her turn the big rancher down, watched her point her horse back this way. She's coming home to you." He smiled. "And when she gets here, she's going to find her man trussed up with a gun to his head. And she's going to have a choice. Come along quiet back east to answer for the trouble she's caused Mr. Croft, or watch us put a bullet in the one thing she rode all this way back for." He stood. "Mr. Croft finds it goes easier when there's someone to trade. A woman'll die before she'll surrender for herself, but for the man she loves—" He shrugged. "They always come quiet for the man they love." And Nathaniel Brooks, bound and burned and kneeling in his own yard, understood the whole shape of the trap at last. He wasn't the target. He was the bait. He was the thing Evelyn would trade her freedom, her life to save. Croft's man had said it days ago through a spyglass, and Nathaniel hadn't heard it. A man doesn't have to catch a woman if he can catch the thing she'd come running back for. They dragged him into the house. They put out the barn fire themselves, oddly, because a burned-down ranch would draw the county, and they wanted no witnesses, just a quiet trade in an empty yard. They settled in to wait for morning. For Evelyn. And Nathaniel, hands bound, watching the gray-eyed man clean his nails with a knife by lamplight, did the only thing left to a man with no weapon but the truth. He started to talk. "You know what he did?" Nathaniel said. "Croft. To the last one." The gray-eyed man didn't look up. "I know I get paid. Girl in his mill, 2 years back. She told him no same as Evelyn. Died at the dye vats. Called an accident. Coroner bought himself a fine house right after." Nathaniel kept his voice level, conversational. The voice of a man with nothing to lose and all night to spend it. "I've got it in writing, in my coat. A lawyer's letter sworn naming names. You're not delivering a runaway bride back to a jilted husband, friend. You're delivering a witness to her own murder. And when they find her dead in a ditch back east, and they will find her because I've made sure a copy of that letter sits in a lawyer's safe with instructions, the rope's going to go round every neck that touched her, including a gray-eyed man who was seen at a burned barn in Montana." For the first time, the knife stopped moving. "You're lying," the gray-eyed man said. "Check the coat." The man checked the coat. He read Ambrose Webb's letter by lamplight, slow, his lips moving, and Nathaniel watched the calm arithmetic behind his eyes do a sum it didn't like. "Croft told us she jilted him," the man said finally. "Said she stole from him, said it was a matter of honor." "Croft lied to you?" Nathaniel said. "Because a man'll hunt a thief or a runaway for money, but he thinks twice about hanging for a murder he didn't know he was part of. You've been paid to be an accessory, and you didn't even know the crime." He leaned forward against his bonds. "So here's a different arithmetic than the one you're used to. You take that letter, you ride east. You take it to a court, not to Croft, and you turn state's evidence on a rich man who used you to clean up his killing. And instead of a rope, you get to be the man who brought Silas Croft down. That's the only version of tomorrow where you don't hang, and it's got nothing to do with the woman at all." Dawn came gray over the eastern hills, and with it came Evelyn Harper, home a half-day early, because she couldn't stand to be away a minute longer than she had to. Riding hard up the road with Deke and Jacob Turner and 11 armed men behind her, and she crested the rise and saw the scorched barn and the strange horses in the yard, and she knew the way she always knew that the door had been kicked in while she was gone. "He's in there," she said, reining up hard. "They've got him." Turner's hand went to his rifle. "Then we go in and get him." "No!" Evelyn's mind was racing, cold and fast, the mind that had survived a mill and a monster, and a run across a continent. "You go in shooting, they kill him first thing. That's what he's there for. He's the trade." Her voice cracked. "They want me. That's all this ever was. They want me to walk in and give myself up for him." "Then you don't walk in," Turner said. "That's the one thing you don't do." But Evelyn was already off her horse. "Evelyn, listen to me." She turned to Turner and Deke, fast, low, urgent. "I'm going to walk in there. Alone, hands up, giving myself up, because that's the only thing that gets their guns off Nathaniel and onto me. And the second they're on me, the second you come through every door and window at once, you'll have one heartbeat while they're busy taking me. Don't waste it." She was already pulling off her coat, showing empty hands. "I spent my whole life letting men decide what happened to me. Not this time. This time, I'm the one springing the trap. Me. My choice. My plan. You just be ready to move." Deke grabbed her arm. "Missy, if this goes wrong, then it goes wrong on my terms, deciding my own life for the man I chose." She pulled free gently. "That's more than I ever thought I'd get, Deke. Now be ready." And Evelyn Harper walked down the rise toward the house where the man she loved was bound with a gun to his head, hands raised alone into the trap she'd chosen to spring, not running from a man's power over her life for the first time in 24 years, but walking straight into the mouth of it on purpose, of her own free will. She came through the door with her hands up. "I'm here," she said. "It's me you want. Let him go and take me. That's the trade, isn't it? That's what you came all this way for." The gray-eyed man was standing by the window. Nathaniel was bound in the chair by the cold hearth, and when he saw her walk in, his face broke open with such terror and love that it nearly stopped her heart. "No," he was saying, "no, don't get out." But she kept her eyes on the gray-eyed man, and her hands up and her voice steady. "Well," the gray-eyed man said, "look at that, right on time, and walking in on her own 2 feet no less. He said you would." He nodded at Nathaniel. "Said a woman'll die for the man she loves. Seems he was right." "Take the trade," Evelyn said. "Let him go." And the gray-eyed man looked at her for a long moment. And then he did something no one in the room expected. He holstered his gun. "No," he said. "I don't believe I will." Nathaniel went rigid. Evelyn's hands wavered. "See?" the gray-eyed man said. "Your man here spent the whole night telling me a story about a dye vat and a dead girl, and a lawyer's letter. And I checked, and the letter's real, and the story fits. Because I'll tell you, Croft always did seem too eager to have this handled quieter than a jilting warrants." He reached into his own coat and drew out Ambrose Webb's letter, and he held it up. "I've been hunting people a long time, ma'am. Bad people mostly till lately. And somewhere along the way I stopped being able to tell the difference between the ones I hunted and myself. But I know this much. I hire out to collect debts and runaways. I don't hire out to help a rich man bury a witness so she can't hang him. That's a different line of work, and it's got a rope at the end of it." He tossed the letter onto the table. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm taking that letter east. I'm walking into a courthouse, and I'm handing a judge the man who paid me to fetch you, and I'm telling him all of it, the vat, the coroner, the fine new house, all of it. Croft doesn't hang alone, I don't hang at all, and you," he looked at Evelyn, "you get to stop running, because a dead man in a cell can't hunt anybody." He walked to Nathaniel and cut the ropes with one stroke. "You've got hard friends outside that door," he said conversationally. "I counted 11 guns on the rise. I'd have been dead the second I twitched wrong, and I knew it, and I chose to holster anyway. You remember that if anybody ever asks whether I did one decent thing." He touched his hat to Evelyn. "Ma'am, for what it's worth, which isn't much, I'm sorry. For the wagon, for all of it. You're the first person I ever couldn't bring myself to deliver." And he walked out the door, past 11 leveled rifles, mounted his horse, and rode east toward a courthouse, toward Silas Croft, toward the one delivery of his life that would set a hunted woman free. Nathaniel came up out of the chair, and Evelyn came across the room, and they met in the middle of it, and he wrapped his burned hands around her, and she buried her face in his neck, and neither of them could speak for a long while. "You walked in. He finally got out, shaking. They had a gun on me, and you walked in. I sprung the trap," she said against his neck. "My choice. My plan. First one all my own." She pulled back and looked at him fierce and wet-eyed. "I spent my whole life having men decide what happened to me. Not today. Today I decided. And I decided you." Behind them, Deke and Turner and the hands were pouring in checking the house, but Nathaniel and Evelyn stood in the middle of it, holding on to each other like two people who'd been pulled out of the same river. "You saw Turner's ranch," Nathaniel said. "The safe life, the good land." "I saw it." And Evelyn stepped back. She reached into the pocket of the coat she'd dropped by the door, and she picked something up off the table where the gray-eyed man's confession to be still lay. She picked up the ledger. The employment ledger, the book she'd kept so neatly, the one that had made her a hand and not a burden. She held it out to him. "I didn't come back because I needed the work," Evelyn Harper said. "I want you to have this back, and I want you to understand why." I looked at the safe life, Nathaniel. I looked at a good house and good land and a good man who'd never once raise his voice. And it was everything the world says a woman like me should want. Her voice broke. And it wasn't home. Because I already found the place where I finally stopped feeling alone. I found it the morning a locked-up man told a half-drowned stranger to eat like she meant it. That's home. That's the only one I want. And I came back to choose it free, no fear, no fraud, no man forcing my hand. Just me deciding my own life for the first time. And I choose you. I choose this. I choose the door you kept open. Nathaniel Brooks took the ledger from her hands. And then at last, 15 years after he'd shut a door in the dark and let a woman die on the wrong side of it, he set the ledger down, and he took Evelyn's face in his scorched and shaking hands, and he stopped for the first time since they'd pulled Clara out of that river apologizing to the dead. "I've spent 15 years, he said, asking Clara to forgive me. Kneeling at that grave asking a dead woman to forgive a shut door." His eyes filled. "And I understand now she was never the one I needed forgiveness from. She's been gone 15 years. She forgave me the moment she died the way the dead forgive everybody. The one who couldn't forgive me was me." He pressed his forehead to Evelyn's. "You didn't teach me how to love again by being the perfect bride fate sent to fix me. You taught me by refusing to be sent. By choosing. By walking into a room with a gun in it because you decided I was worth it. You taught a man who shut a door how to open one, and then you walked through it yourself free and stayed." "I stayed?" Evelyn whispered. "Then I'm done grieving," Nathaniel Brooks said. 15 years. I'm setting it down. Not because I forgot her, I'll never forget her, but because you showed me the difference between honoring the dead and being buried with them. And I choose to be alive, with you, in a house with somebody living in it." Outside, the sun was full up over the hills now, and the barn was scorched, but standing, and Lazarus was safe in the yard, and 11 good men were putting a broken morning back together. And in the middle of a house that had been a grave for 15 years, a man who'd learned to want, and a woman who'd learned to choose, stood holding on to each other in the light, both of them free, both of them home. The long run over at last for one, and the long grief over at last for the other. Neither of them was alone anymore. That was the whole of it. That was everything. The letter came out of the east 6 weeks later, and Nathaniel Brooks read it standing in the same yard where he'd once knelt bound with a gun to his head. It was from Ambrose Webb. The gray-eyed man had done exactly what he'd said he would. He'd ridden into a courthouse and laid the whole thing before a judge. The dye vat, the dead girl, the bought coroner, the hired men, all of it. And then he'd sat in the witness box and told it again under oath, calm as a man reading a grocery list, and every word had landed on Silas Croft like a stone. "Croft is arrested," Webb wrote. "The old inquest is reopened. The coroner has fled, which the court takes as its own kind of testimony. And here is the part you'll want to read to Evelyn twice, Nathaniel with Croft in a cell, and his money frozen, and his name a scandal in every paper east of the Mississippi. There is no one left to pay men to ride west. It is over, truly over. Tell her she can stop listening for the door." Nathaniel carried the letter into the house. Evelyn was at the table with the ledger, and she looked up, and she read his face the way she read all faces, and she went very still. "It's Croft," she said. "It's over," Nathaniel said. "He's in a cell. His money's frozen. There's nobody left to send." He set the letter down in front of her. "You can stop listening for the door." Evelyn Harper looked at the letter for a long time. She didn't touch it. And then slowly, her shoulders came down from around her ears, came down in a way Nathaniel had never once seen them do. Not in all the weeks she'd been under his roof. Because he understood now that even here, even safe, even loved, some animal part of her had kept one ear open every single night of her life. "Read it to me again," she said quietly. "Deke told me once you have to hear a thing twice before your body believes it." So Nathaniel read it to her again. And when he finished, Evelyn Harper put her face in her hands at the kitchen table and cried loud, this time, out loud. The sound she'd never once let herself make, the crying of a person who has been afraid for so long that safety, when it finally comes, feels almost like grief. Nathaniel came around the table and held her while she did it, and he didn't tell her to stop, and he didn't tell her it was all right. He just kept the door open with his arms and let her be as loud as she needed to be. They were married in the fall in a small ceremony in the yard, under a sky washed clean by the first cold rain of the season, which Evelyn declared was fitting since a storm had brought her and a clear day could keep her. The whole territory came or near enough. The hands scrubbed themselves raw and wore collars that choked them. Old Deke gave the bride away and cried the whole time and swore up and down afterward it was dust. Ambrose Webb rode out from town to stand up for Nathaniel, the way he'd once stood up at a wedding that never happened, and this time the old lawyer said, holding his old friend's shoulder before it began, "I've waited 15 years to stand at the right one, Nathaniel. Don't you dare make me wait for a third." And Jacob Turner came. That was the thing nobody had expected, and the thing that told the whole story of what kind of man he was. He rode up 2 days before with a wagon behind him, and in the wagon was furniture, good solid handmade furniture, a rocking chair, and a cradle frame, and a great long harvest table. "My late wife's people were carpenters," he said gruffly when Evelyn came out to meet him with her mouth open. "This all sat in a barn on my place gathering dust because I couldn't stand to look at it and couldn't stand to burn it. A house needs a table people actually sit at." He looked away out at the hills. "Seems to me this is a house that's going to have people at it. Figured it ought to have a table big enough." Evelyn threw her arms around the big man before he could get away, and Jacob Turner stood stiff and startled for a second and then patted her back with one enormous careful hand. "You be happy," he said. "That's all I ever rode out here for, turns out. Just took me 400 miles to figure out it wasn't going to be with me." He cleared his throat hard. "Now let go of me, girl, before your rancher gets ideas." At the wedding, he stood in the back and clapped louder than anyone, and when it was done, he shook Nathaniel Brooks' hand and held it a moment longer than a handshake needs. "You kept quiet on that porch when it counted," Turner said. "I'll not forget it. A man who won't grab is a man I'll ride for. You ever need guns at your back again, you send word south. I'll come running, and I'll bring the 7. But the story does not end at the wedding, and both of them knew, even that day, that it wasn't meant to. Because they had both spent too long in the cold to build a warm house and lock the door behind them. It was Evelyn who said it first, a week after the wedding, standing in the yard, looking at all those empty rooms Nathaniel had built for a family that grief had swallowed. 4 women lived, she said. Off that wagon. 4 made it home. But there are wagons every season, Nathaniel. Every single season. Women shipped west like freight to men they've never met. And some of those men are Turners. Her jaw tightened. And some of them are Crofts. And there's no way to know which, standing at a railhead with a contract in your hand, and no money, and no name, and nowhere on this earth to go, if the man at the other end turns out to be a monster. She turned to him. There was nowhere for me to go. I want to know, did you ever think about that? The whole time I was running, there was nowhere. No safe door on the whole frontier a woman like me could knock on. If your light hadn't been the one my dying horse walked toward, then you'd have died in a wash, Nathaniel said. I know. So let's build the door, Evelyn said. The one that wasn't there. Let's make this the place the horse walks toward on purpose. Nathaniel Brooks looked at the woman he'd married, and at the empty rooms behind her, and at the great long table Jacob Turner had built for a house that was going to have people at it, and he understood what she was asking, and he understood that it was the truest thing anyone had ever asked of him. "A shelter?" he said. "A working one. Not charity. She'd have hated that whoever she is, the next one who crawls up half dead. Honest work and a safe roof and time. Time to stop running. Time to figure out her own mind the way I got to. And then a choice her own free, no man's hand forcing it." Evelyn's voice caught. "Every woman who comes through gets what you gave me, Nathaniel. Not a rescue, a door, and the room behind it to become the one who decides." Word got around the way word does. At first it was a girl who'd come west for a marriage that turned ugly inside a month, who'd run with nothing, and been pointed by a mail rider who remembered the story of the Brooks Ranch toward the one light in the valley where a running woman could knock. She arrived thin and silent, and braced for cruelty exactly the way Evelyn had, and Evelyn met her on the porch with a bowl in her hands and said the only words that mattered. "Eat," Evelyn told her. "Eat like you mean it. Nobody's going to take the bowl." The girl stayed 3 months. She mended fence and kept books and learned she was worth something. And then one clear morning she took wages and a good horse and rode off toward a town where a schoolhouse needed a teacher, and she went of her own free will, having chosen it. And she cried when she said goodbye. And so did Evelyn. Then it was 2. Then it was a house full. The empty rooms filled up. The rooms Nathaniel had built for a family and sealed for 15 years filled up with women learning to sleep without one ear open. Women learning to eat like they meant it. Women fixing broken things with their own hands because it reminded them they still existed. Deke taught them horses. The younger hands taught them the range, and more than one of them married the woman they taught, which Deke said was the most trouble the whole arrangement ever caused and worth every minute of it. And the ranch that had been a grave became season by season the safest place in the territory. People stopped telling the old story about the grieving widower who'd buried himself alive in a dark house. They told a new one instead about the spread up the valley, where any woman who'd been sold or beaten or abandoned by the hard world could crawl up half dead in the rain and find a bowl in her hands and a bolt on the inside of a door she'd never need to use. They called it, some of them, the open door. Nathaniel never named it that. It named itself. There was one more letter near the end of that first year, and this one Evelyn read aloud to Nathaniel on the porch in the last warm evening before winter. It was from the gray-eyed man. He hadn't signed his name. Nathaniel doubted the name he'd have signed was his own anyway. But it was him. He wrote that Croft had been convicted, that the dead girl at the dye vat had gotten her inquest at last, 2 years late, and her people had gotten to bury her honest with the truth on the stone instead of the lie. He wrote that he himself had walked out of it a free man on account of turning state's evidence, and that he'd taken the strangest turn of his whole strange life, and gone to work for a marshal hunting the kind of men he used to hire out to. "I have caught 4 so far like the ones I used to be," he wrote. "It does not make up for the wagon. Nothing makes up for the wagon. But a man has to point himself at something, and I have decided to point myself at the far end of the road I was walking and undo what I can of it before I'm done." And at the bottom, one last line. "Tell her I think about the morning she walked into that room with her hands up more than she'd believe. In 20 years of hunting frightened people, she was the only one who ever walked toward me on purpose. I did not know a person could do that. It is the reason I am who I am now instead of who I was. So it turns out she saved somebody too that morning. She saved the man holding the gun." Evelyn folded the letter and sat with it in her lap a long time in the failing light. "I sprung the trap to save you," she said finally. "That's all I meant to do. Walk in, get the guns off you, spring it." "I know. I didn't know I was saving him too." She looked out at the yard, where a new arrival, a woman who'd come in 2 weeks back with a black eye and a baby, and nothing else, was teaching that baby to pat the nose of an old patient horse named Lazarus, who'd grown into the gentlest animal on the place, as if he remembered what it was to be the thing everybody gave up on. You never do know, do you? What one open door leads to, who all walks through it after? No, Nathaniel said. You don't. That's the whole terror of opening it, and the whole point. They sat on the porch a while in the quiet, and it was a full quiet now, the quiet of a place with too many people in it, rather than none. Do you still talk to her? Evelyn asked after a time. She didn't have to say who. Clara. Nathaniel thought about it honestly, the way she'd taught him to answer everything. I used to talk to her every day, he said. For 15 years, mostly to apologize, mostly to ask her to forgive a shut door. He reached over and took his wife's hand. I don't do that anymore. Not because I've forgotten her. I put fresh flowers on the grave every spring, the wild ones, the kind she liked. But I don't kneel there asking to be forgiven anymore. Because I finally understood what I was really doing all those years. I wasn't honoring Clara. I was using her. He said it plainly, the ugly true thing. I was using her death as the reason I never had to open a door again. As long as I was grieving her, I never had to risk anything, never had to want anything, never had to feel that particular terror of loving somebody who might walk through the door and out of it. Her death was my excuse, and that's no way to honor the dead, turning them into the lock on your own life. Evelyn's fingers tightened in his. What changed it? She asked. The exact thing. I want to know. Nathaniel Brooks was quiet a moment. You didn't fix me, he said. That's what I want you to understand all the way down. I know how the story would go if a fool told it lonely rancher perfect bride rides in love heals the broken man. That's a lie. That's the lie that would have killed us both, because it would have made you into the same thing. Clara was a woman whose whole job was to save me. And I'd have loved you for saving me, instead of loving you for you, and the day you couldn't save me, I'd have blamed you, and it would have rotted. Inyintanamu. He turned to face her fully. That's not what happened. 15 years without love didn't end because fate sent me the perfect woman to fix a broken man. It ended because a half-drowned stranger said please on my porch, and I discovered I still had it in me to say yes, not for her sake. For no reason at all. Just plain mercy before I knew a single thing about her, before there was anything in it for me. His voice went rough. The healing didn't start when you walked in. It started the second I decided to open the door to somebody I owed nothing to. You didn't heal me, Evelyn. You just needed a door, and it turned out I still had the hands to open one. And opening it, that's what saved me. Not you. The opening. Evelyn Harper. Brooks sat with that in the last light, and she understood that her husband had just told her the deepest true thing he knew, and that it was the same true thing she'd been living all year without a word for it. That's why the shelter matters so much to you, she said. It's not charity. It's not even kindness exactly. It's the door, Nathaniel said. It's just the door. Kept open on purpose for whoever the storm blows in next. Because the day I stop being willing to open it to a stranger I owe nothing to, that's the day I start dying again. So we keep it open. Not for them even. For us. To stay alive. Down in the yard, the woman with the baby laughed at something the baby did, and old Deke laughed at her laughing, and Lazarus tossed his head, and a lamp came on in one of the rooms that had been sealed for 15 years, and was now full of a life that hadn't existed a year ago. Nathaniel watched Evelyn watch it. He watched his wife's face in the lamplight, the woman who'd crawled up his steps more dead than alive, who'd fought for a dying foal, who'd refused to be sent away, who'd looked a safe life in the eye and chosen a harder, truer one instead, who'd walked into a room with a gun in it because she'd decided he was worth it, who'd taken a house full of empty rooms and filled them with the exact mercy that had once saved her own life. And he understood watching her. The thing the whole 15 years had been trying to teach him, and couldn't because he'd kept the door shut against the lesson. Love had not arrived as a promise kept. It had not arrived as a contract honored, or a bride delivered, or a debt paid. It had arrived in the end, exactly the way she had, as someone who simply needed kindness on a night when giving it cost him something before he knew there'd be anything in it for him at all. That was the secret. That was the whole of it. Grief hadn't ended because the past finally let go of him. Grief had ended because he'd finally stopped letting the past decide the future, stopped using an old wound as the lock on a door that was meant to stay open. The wildflowers would go on the grave again in the spring. He would go on remembering, but he would remember the way a living man remembers, with gratitude instead of guilt. And then he would come home to a house too full of people to ever be a grave again, and he would keep the door open one more day, and one more after that, for as long as he had hands to open it with. Evelyn felt him watching her, and turned and smiled, and reached for his scarred hand without a word. 15 years without love did not end because the perfect woman rode in and healed a broken man. It ended the moment a grieving man chose, for no reason but mercy, to open a door that grief had kept locked, and discovered on the far side of it that he had been alive the whole time, only waiting for someone to knock.